All right, we are gonna take a break from doing the build videos and I'm gonna do a couple smaller videos. This video is gonna be some basic soldering. We're gonna swap out a connector on my speed controller. We're gonna go from an EC5 to an XT90. So let's get into it. Okay, so here we are in table view, and I just wanted to go over some soldering basics really before we got started. But we're gonna swap out this connector, EC5 connector for an XT90 connector. The solder that I use is Rosin core. It's a 60-40 split, and I found that works good for me. I like this thin stuff. I feel like I can feed the solder how I want more accurately, and it's easier to do the smaller work. And then I use, this is just my iron portion, but I use the Hakko FX888 soldering iron. Also like to have this third arm. I always put on one side here, I put some shrink tubing on it to protect the wiring from the teeth, and then the other side I leave without it. And I double wrap the shrink tubing. The nice thing about that is the shrink tubing is really heat resistant. So you can look at doing that to yours. I also use this soldering flux when we pre-tin the wires, so I'll show you that. And then, you know, on this XT90 connector, it's important to know it has the positive marked on the housing and the negative, so make sure you get those right. You definitely don't want to cross polarity your speed controller, especially this hobby wing, because it does not have circuit protection. And then for this 12 gauge wire, I set my iron to around 850 degrees F or 450 C. The smaller gauge wire, you'll turn the iron down some from there, but that's where I like to be for this 12 gauge ESC wire. One other thing to cover before I actually get started and turn this iron on, there's two critical components when you solder. One is keeping this tip clean. So my iron comes with a little sponge. It's kind of nice. It has these slits which help to kind of wick the solder off the tip. But you'll get this sponge wet, and you can use a sponge to wipe your soldering iron after every time using it. And it's really important to keep the tip clean. And then two, you can see, so solder flows to where the heat is. And you can see this tip, it's a pointed tip. And so when you're doing soldering work, you don't want to put just the tip like this on the wire. You actually want to hold the flat side of the tip on the wire. And if you do that, you get quite a bit better heat transfer, and it helps the solder flow much quicker. So, you know, you're going to come in like this, not up like that when you work the wires. So you'll see me when I do it. You want to make sure that you get in there and get on that flat part of the tip. Okay, so now let me set up and we'll get started. Okay, so we got this all set up to solder, and the first step when you're soldering any joint is you want to do what's called pre-tinning. And so as what I've done here is I've stripped this wire, and you can see there's bare wire here, and I took this flux and dipped it in there just a little bit, and then is what I do is I come in, I put a little solder on the tip like that, and then I touch the wire and continue feeding the solder in until you can actually feed from the top. You'll see it flow. And I got that wire a little, there we go. And that's just what's called pre-tinning. So after I do that, I come over here. Every time after I do something, you want to clean the tip off because you don't want to get a glob of solder. So then the connector, you're going to do the same thing. You're going to stick this iron in here and try to feed that solder kind of under. And if it bubbles on top, just flip it around. And just get some solder there. The idea is that you have solder on both joints. It doesn't have to be a lot, but you need to get some solder. You can see here. Hopefully you can see that, but not a ton, but enough to where if you heat this joint up, it's gonna be enough for it to stick together and form a good bond. And so these XT90s have this little thing. I'm gonna stick it on this positive side here. It's kind of an awkward one with these wires so close. And so this is my positive wire, so I'm gonna find the positive here. And I'm just gonna hold this like so and hold the heat on there, and you'll kind of see the solder to start flowing from the connector side. And once that happens, to be honest with you, that didn't work as well as I would have liked. Okay, so let's try this again. I stacked these wire cutters and these vice grips to kind of make it to where it'll just hold this connector where I need it to be. And then I can come in here and add some heat. Okay, this thing is being a bugger. So add some heat. Watch the solder flow around that wire. Hold it until the solder solidifies. And there we go. So that one is in there. It's really critical that you don't hold the iron. And, you know, if you make a mistake, give this connector a little time to cool off because they get really hot and you don't want to melt this plastic. So that's really critical that you do that. And this other one here is going to be a little trickier. So let's feed this wire through this little housing first. You know, what I like to do is I like to try to rotate this connector so when you flip it back around, there's no strain on it. This, like I said, this one's going to be a little bit trickier. Hopefully it cooperates. So just come in here. And don't forget, you're cleaning the tip every time. Come in here and heat this thing up. Yeah, that's gonna also need, I really probably should have, when I pre-tinned this, put a little more solder down on the connector. Because this thing is not getting as much as I would like. So So let's do that. There we go. So then you just let this thing cool off, and then you can slide that jacket. So you can see now that this thing sits pretty nicely in there. And always check positive, negative, that we got that right before you plug this thing in. So let's check. Yeah, the heat's still a little warm. I'm gonna let that cool off, and then we'll slide this on and wrap up this video. So one thing you'll notice too is I've done this with the battery in the car, and I like to lay out the battery how I want it in the car, and it helps you to size and route these wires to where everything fits. And you can see these wires are perfectly sized for this to plug in. And so these things are cool now, so we'll just push that on. We got that on, and then we can go ahead and do this plug in. All right, we got power. So that is how you change a connector on your speed controller. I'm gonna do a more detailed, like full speed control wiring job for the Truggy build, so look forward to that. And hopefully you find this video useful, and please subscribe to my channel if you do.